blood-sucking vampires. The likes of Count Dracula need no introduction. Over hundreds of years, thousands of tales have been told about the undead. However, somewhere between folklore and science, real stories emerge that often remain unsolved. Today we share a handful of such tales and ask ourselves, could vampires really exist? Welcome to Mysteries Retold. On May the 4th, 1932, a 32-year-old woman named Lily was found dead in Stockholm, Sweden. Lily, a prostitute, was murdered in her small apartment. The details surrounding the discovery are truly sickening. Upon discovering her body, the police determined that she had been dead for 2 or 3 days. She was found naked, lying face down on the bed. Her clothes were neatly folded on a chair by the bed, and evidence showed she had engaged in sexual intercourse shortly before death. The cause of death was judged to be blunt force trauma to the head. The lack of blood at the crime scene left detectives confused. Further examination showed that Lily's body had been drained of blood, with evidence of saliva and a bite mark on her neck. Next to the bed, there was a gravy ladle that had blood in it. It was thought that the ladle had been used to consume the drained blood, and perhaps to decant it into another container and taken away. At the time, the strange case was all over the media in Sweden. The bizarre circumstances and the connotations with vampire rituals seemed to spike public curiosity. Many suspects came and went. The last person known to see Lily was her neighbor Minnie Jansen. Minnie told the police that Lily had stopped by her apartment days before her murder to get some condoms. Minnie said that it was common for a nude Lily to come to her door and ask for condoms. After not seeing Lily for a few days, she called the police. Initially, 9 men who frequently visited Lily were interviewed by the police as suspects. However, the police let them all go, deeming none of them viable suspects. Sadly, the area where Lily's apartment was located was infamous for prostitution. Assaults, crime and murder were common here back in 1932. Prostitutes have long been the targets of sexual predators and serial killers. In this area of Stockholm, there were many people in similar situations to Lily, which, apart from the draining of the blood, caused the case to lack distinctive clues. Despite all the evidence gathered, including the collection of saliva from Lily's neck, nothing led any closer to capturing the killer. There were no leads, no suspects, and no conclusions that could be drawn. Many theories have been put forward, from killer cops to real vampires. Theories suggesting that the terrible acts could have been carried out by a vampire point to the consumption of blood, evidence of sucking at the neck, and the killer's seemingly supernatural ability to avoid all police detection. However unlikely it is that the killer arrived in the form of a real vampire, the case remains unsolved, and all we really know is that Lily's blood had been drunk and drained. Not all vampire stories shared by the media or individuals are so gruesome. However, some still point to the idea that there is a community of undead living amongst us. One such story shared with us on Reddit describes an individual's experience with what he believes were 2 vampires. Martin was a military man, 24 years old, and had just returned from deployment. He was walking around his local area late on a dark evening after leaving the mall. He had popped into one of his favorite stores in a quieter area of the city to buy a few presents for his family. After coming out of the store and turning left further into the alleyway, Martin noticed 2 smartly dressed men seemingly following another man who was alone and walking in front of the 2 men. As Martin followed, slightly concerned, the 2 men quickened their pace, seemingly heading after the single man with purpose. Remember, Martin is a military man, not squeamish, and trained to deal with conflict. Sensing something wasn't right with this situation, Martin whispered to himself, "What are they doing?" In that very instant, both men turned around and stared down at Martin. The strangest thing about this is that their eyes glowed at him, the look of a predator ready to attack. The 2 men walked with purpose, this time towards Martin. Martin, still a few blocks away from the men, turned and dashed into the nearest shop. It was another gift shop. Martin slammed the door and shouted at the shopkeeper to lock the doors. The shopkeeper knew something was amiss and immediately locked the door. Martin and the shopkeeper turned, and the two men were at the shop door looking through the window. They had just travelled 2 blocks in no time whatsoever, their predatory eyes now staring right at them through the glass. Martin and the shopkeeper were petrified. One of the men raised his top lip in what was almost a snarling motion, exposing sharp teeth on his upper gums. Martin and the shopkeeper looked at each other, and then suddenly, as quickly as they had arrived, they were gone. Both of them saw a flash of the 2 men leaving, not down the road though. They had moved upwards. The pair of them stood terrified and waited in the shop, recounting the event for half an hour. The shopkeeper checked the CCTV. Even though the footage of Martin and the shopkeeper showed them looking out the door, no one on the other side of the glass had been recorded. The 2 men were not there, and the footage showed they were looking out onto an empty street. After the half hour passed, Martin called a taxi and got out of town. It stands as a horrifying experience that both Martin and the shopkeeper will never forget. Blood-sucking mysteries are even more prevalent in the animal kingdom, and many believe that these cases could be linked to a mythical creature called the Chupacabra. The Chupacabra is supposedly a creature with leathery skin, standing about 4 feet tall. It is a reptile-like creature that stands and hops in a fashion akin to a kangaroo. There are hundreds of stories from multiple countries that report Chupacabra activity, many of which are first-person accounts from farmers who have witnessed their animals dying under strange events. A story from Mexican farmers in December 2020 through February 2021 documents another blood-sucking mystery linked to the Chupacabra. A spate of deadly attacks took place at a Mexican ranch, and worried farmers contacted the police on Christmas Day in 2020. 12 sheep were found dead, with strange puncture marks on their necks, and all the sheep's blood had been drained. Further reports were filed on December 28th, January 12th, and February 21st. Over this period, a total of 18 sheep were attacked, killed, and had their blood drained. Animal experts have analyzed the dead sheep and concluded that there is no known predator that could have attacked the sheep in this way. The bite marks are not consistent with bats, dogs, coyotes, and, thankfully, humans. The police also had no evidence to suggest it was a cruel prank or carried out by thieves. No sheep had been taken, and the stories from farmers come from a tight and supportive community. In the wake of these events, let's delve into the legend of the Chupacabra, a mythical creature believed to be linked to such blood-sucking mysteries. The Chupacabra is a well-known legend, particularly in Latin America. There are many tales of sightings of the beast, and it is well documented that it sucks the blood of livestock and other animals. However, despite a flurry of reported sightings, officially, the beast remains that of folklore. Perhaps not a human vampire as we know it, but to some the Chupacabra stands as the vampire of the animal kingdom. Do they exist? Strange blood-sucking tales of livestock and sightings of the beast continue to be reported, and many stories still stand as an unsolved mystery. Another famous story surrounds the events of a man named Arnold Powell. Records show that Arnold had sought to claim land and moved to Serbia in the early 1700s. Arnold made it known that before his move from what would today be the area of Kosovo to Serbia, he had been previously attacked by vampires. Arnold claimed he managed to rid himself of the curse by finding the vampire's grave and eating the soil from it before smearing the vampire's blood on himself. In 1725, Arnold fell to his death from a hay wagon breaking his neck. He was buried, and the town attempted to move on from his death and the strange mystery surrounding the man. However, within 3 or 4 weeks, villagers started to claim they had seen Arnold. 4 villages stated that they had not only seen him, but they had interacted with him. These 4 claimed that Arnold had cursed them, and they were now plagued. Remarkably, all 4 people died, no accident this time, and the cause of death was inconclusive. The eerie events surrounding Arnold's reappearance fueled fear in the villagers, and convinced that the vampire cure hadn't worked, they took drastic measures. Discussion fell over the village, and rumors about Arnold continued to surge. Arnold's claims of previously curing himself of the vampire plague were well remembered. A group of villagers decided that he was back and he was a vampire. The cure hadn't worked. The villagers went to Arnold's grave and dug up the coffin. Opening it, Arnold's body was there, but he hadn't decomposed. In fact, the opposite seemed to have happened. He didn't show signs of death. Fresh blood flowed from his eyes and nose. His hair had grown noticeably, and apart from his pale appearance, he looked somewhat well. His shirt, the inside of the coffin, and a small section of skin under his mouth were stained with blood. They had found their vampire. The villagers drilled a wooden stake through Arnold's heart. It is said Arnold groaned and started to bleed. With that, they removed the body from the coffin and cut off Arnold's head. They burned the body and got rid of the ashes. They then exhumed the bodies of the 4 victims from the village and did the same to prevent any more vampires from rising. Events stopped for 5 years, until in 1731 it started again. This time, 17 people fell ill and died within a few weeks. Accounts vary, but it is said that experienced involuntary jerks of their body, stabbing sensations with chest pain and fever. Before death, some claimed to be visited by others that had already died shortly beforehand. The village reported the mass deaths to the Austrian military, who sent a disease specialist to the area. He found no sign of infectious disease, but said it was likely down to general malnutrition in the area. The villagers strongly disagreed and stated it was a vampire curse. It was agreed that some bodies would be exhumed and examined, putting to bed theories of vampires. However, what was found next shook the community. Some had decomposed, but others had not. In fact, the ones that had not decomposed had the same signs of being a vampire: blood in and around their mouths. It was reported back to the military that something paranormal could be at play. A military request to execute all vampires was submitted. More support was sent to investigate as the rumors around the village began to grow wider. 2 officers arrived, and 2 more people died shortly afterward. They began to dig up some of the other bodies, and again found many in the same condition as Arnold. It was reported that some even appeared younger than when they had first died. More investigations ensued, and it was discovered that the first victims to die had all directly or indirectly involved themselves with Arnold. When Arnold killed the first 4 victims, he had also killed 2 sheep. The first victims supposedly didn't want the meat to go to waste, and they cooked and ate the sheep. One of the women had even smeared Arnold's blood on herself, in the same way Arnold had promoted that was how he cured himself. They all died first. With that, the investigation concluded that all bodies would be dug up, a stake driven through the heart, heads cut off, and then burned. In total, 40 bodies were dug up, and 17 of these bodies showed the signs of being undead. These 17 were beheaded and treated as vampires. All decomposing bodies were reburied and laid to rest. The mysterious deaths stopped and didn't return. This story is relatively well documented for one that is hundreds of years old. Several scientific theories exist that may help to explain what occurred. Nonetheless, now hundreds of years later, nothing can be proved. This leads some to argue that the village was, in fact, the home of the undead. Could vampires be real? Despite evidence through folklore and modern science suggesting otherwise, some tales cannot be disproved. Where there is doubt, there is also truth. When 99% has been explained, what remains? So again we ask ourselves, could vampires be real? Thank you for watching Mysteries Retold. If you have enjoyed the content, feel free to subscribe to catch future mysteries. Until next time, folks, perhaps keep some garlic close to you. Good night.